I was standing in Halden and Company's main conference room when my director smiled and said, "We're thrilled to promote Mark Henson to Director of Client Services." Applause filled the room. My hands didn't move. I'd been doing that job for 18 months. Every client retention strategy. Every recovery plan. Every late-night crisis call. All of it had my fingerprints on it, but none of it had my name attached anymore. Mark, who once reported to me, shook hands with executives across the table. He didn't look at me once. Not even a glance. That told me everything I needed to know about how long he'd known this was coming. I sat there with my coffee getting cold, watching people congratulate someone for stepping into a role I'd already been performing without the title or the salary. The room felt smaller suddenly. The air tasted like metal. When the meeting ended, my boss caught my arm. "Elena, we really appreciate you being such a team player through this transition." Team player. That's what they call it when you build the ladder someone else climbs. I smiled and said nothing. I was already calculating my next move. My name is Elena Brooks. I'm 34 years old, and until this morning, I believed hard work spoke for itself. I've been at Halden and Company for 6 years. Started as a client services coordinator, worked my way up to senior lead. When our former director quit last year, leadership asked me to hold things together temporarily while they figured out next steps. Temporarily turned into 18 months. During that time, I led every major retention meeting. I signed off on decisions that executives depended on, even though my title never changed. I personally trained our account managers. I built recovery plans that saved 3 of our largest contracts when competitors tried poaching them. I created the frameworks that became our department playbook. The work wasn't temporary. The recognition was. I have a communications degree from a state university. No MBA. No Ivy League pedigree. Just results that kept our client retention rate at 92% when the industry average was 78%. My apartment is 15 minutes from the office. I live alone with a cat named Audit who judges me when I work past midnight. Which happens more often than I'd like to admit. This morning changed something in me. Not anger exactly. Something colder. More focused. Every few months, I'd asked about formalizing my role. Every time, I got the same polished response from leadership. "Not yet, Elena. Let's get through this quarter first. You're doing incredible work right where you are. We can't afford to disrupt the momentum you've built." I started keeping a document of these conversations. Dates, exact quotes, who was in the room. Not because I planned to use it. Just because something felt wrong, and documentation felt like the only control I had. The phrase that came up most often was indispensable. At first, I thought it was a compliment. Then I realized what it actually meant. They couldn't afford to promote me because they needed me doing 2 jobs for 1 salary. I was more valuable to them as the person holding everything together than as the person officially leading it. Indispensable doesn't mean irreplaceable. It means too useful to acknowledge. 3 months ago, they hired Mark. Fresh MBA from Northwestern. Consulting background. Expensive suit on his first day. They told me he'd support the team. I should have known better. I spent 6 weeks training Mark. I gave him my client contact templates, my crisis response protocols, my retention frameworks. Everything I'd built over 18 months. He absorbed it all like a sponge. Took meticulous notes. Asked smart questions. I actually liked him at first. He seemed genuine. Then I started noticing small things. He'd reword my strategies slightly and present them in meetings with leadership copied. He'd take my client briefings and deliver them himself, positioning them as his analysis. At first, I told myself this was collaboration. Then I noticed the credit only moved one way. In one meeting, Mark presented a retention framework I'd created for a struggling account. He explained it so well that an executive said, "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need more of." I sat 3 seats away and said nothing. Mark had learned my style so thoroughly that leadership couldn't tell the difference between his work and mine anymore. And why would they look closely? He had the credentials they respected. The MBA. The background. I had the results. But results without the right packaging apparently didn't count. The announcement came during our monthly all-hands meeting. No warning. No conversation beforehand. "We're excited to announce Mark Henson's promotion to Director of Client Services. He brings fresh perspective and strategic thinking that will take this department to the next level." Fresh perspective. Strategic thinking. Code words for MBA from the right school. People applauded. I watched Mark smile humbly and thank everyone for their support. He mentioned wanting to build on the strong foundation the team has created. After the meeting, my boss pulled me aside. His voice dropped to that careful tone executives use when they're about to say something they know is wrong but won't change. "Elena, I want you to know how much we value everything you've done to build such a strong foundation here. Mark's going to need your continued partnership as he steps into this role." Foundation. That word stuck in my throat. I wasn't the foundation. I was the entire structure. And they'd just hired someone to stand on top of it and take credit for the view. I went home that night and created a new folder on my laptop. I named the file Foundation. No extension. Just the truth, and I started documenting everything. The file grew quickly. Every client I'd saved. Every framework I'd created. Every measurable result that had my work behind it. Hartwell Manufacturing, retained after 18-month relationship crisis. My intervention. Revenue protected, $2.4 million annually. Prescott Industries, recovered after service failure nearly cost us the contract. My recovery plan. 3-year renewal secured. Donovan Group, expanded services after I identified growth opportunities they hadn't considered. Additional revenue, $1.7 million. I didn't include opinions or emotions. Just dates, numbers, outcomes. Evidence that couldn't be argued with or reinterpreted. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about having an audit trail when the time came. At work, I stayed professional. Smiled in meetings. Supported Mark publicly. Answered his questions when he needed help navigating situations I'd already handled a dozen times. People probably thought I was handling the situation with grace. They were half right. I was handling it. Just not the way they thought. Every night, I updated the file. Every success got documented. Every time Mark presented my work as his own, I noted it with timestamps and witnesses. They thought I was silent. I was just building my case. The breaking point came 6 weeks after Mark's promotion. He was presenting to our executive team about client retention strategies for the upcoming quarter. I sat in the back of the conference room, laptop open, taking notes. Halfway through his presentation, I realized I was looking at my own framework. Not inspired by it. Not adapted from it. Word for word what I'd created 8 months earlier. He even used the same diagram I'd drawn. The 3-phase approach to relationship recovery. The exact language I'd developed. One executive leaned forward. "Mark, this is excellent work. This is exactly the kind of proactive thinking we need to stay competitive." Another added, "I wish we'd had this kind of strategic framework years ago." We did have it. I'd presented this exact strategy last year. Same room. Different audience. Nobody remembered. Or maybe they did remember, but it hit different coming from someone with an MBA. I closed my laptop quietly. Walked back to my desk. Pulled up my resume and started updating it. That night, I didn't go home until after midnight. Not because I was working. Because I was applying to every director-level position I could find. The response was immediate and startling. Within 3 days, I had interview requests from 5 companies. Within a week, that number doubled. Every conversation started the same way. They'd review my resume, look at my results, and ask the obvious question, why doesn't Halden and Company already have you in this position? None of them sounded confused. Just curious. I'd practiced my answer. Professional. Diplomatic. I'm looking for an organization that aligns recognition with contribution. But what I thought was, because they'd rather pay someone else more to do what I've already been doing. The interviews felt different than any I'd done before. I wasn't asking for opportunities. I was evaluating whether they deserved my work. One recruiter said something that stuck with me, Elena, your employer's silence about your value is actually the strongest endorsement you could ask for. It means you've outgrown them, and everyone else can see it. I'd spent 18 months waiting for Halden to see what I was worth. Turned out, I just needed to let the market decide instead. On a Tuesday morning, I got an email from Vantage Partners. Global consultancy. Twice Halden's size. They wanted to talk about their Director of Client Services position. The interview was scheduled for that Friday. I took a sick day and didn't tell anyone where I was going. Vantage Partners didn't waste time. 2 rounds of interviews over 1 week. They asked about my frameworks, my retention strategies, my approach to client relationships. They already knew the answers. They'd done their research. Talked to people in the industry who'd worked with me. One interviewer mentioned they'd heard about my work on the Hartwell recovery from someone at a conference. My reputation had traveled further than I realized. The offer came 8 days after my first interview. No games. No, let's think about it. Just a straightforward email with an attachment. Director of Client Services. Base salary 40% higher than my current cap. Profit sharing. Full benefits. Start date flexible based on my notice period. The email ended with a line I read 3 times. We don't believe in temporary arrangements or trial periods for talent like yours. This is a leadership position, and we're offering it to a leader. I realized I'd never been asking for permission. I'd just been waiting in the wrong room. I printed the offer letter. Held it in my hands. This single page represented everything Halden had refused to give me despite 18 months of proving I could do the work. The next morning, I walked into my director's office and placed it on his desk. He read it slowly. His face went through several expressions. Surprise. Concern. That forced smile executives use when they're calculating damage. Elena. This is unexpected. Is there anything we can do to make you stay? I'd prepared for this question. Practiced my answer. But sitting there, looking at him try to suddenly value what he'd ignored for 18 months, I realized there was nothing to say. They'd already decided my worth. Vantage Partners simply confirmed it. No, I said. There isn't. I gave 4 weeks' notice. Professional. Clean. No drama. Halden countered with a promotion offer 2 days later. Director of Client Services. 22% salary increase. Immediate title change. I declined within an hour. They offered again. This time 28%. Plus bonus structure. My boss said they'd fast-track my career development. Fast-track. After 18 months of doing the job without recognition. I declined again. Politely. Firmly. What they didn't understand was this wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect. About being valued before someone else proved my worth for them. Mark avoided me during those 4 weeks. We'd pass in hallways and he'd suddenly need to check his phone. In meetings, he wouldn't make eye contact. I didn't blame him exactly. He'd taken an opportunity offered to him. But he'd also known what he was taking and from whom. My last day was a Friday in March. Exactly 19 months after I'd started temporarily holding the department together. They threw a small gathering. Cake in the break room. People said nice things about my contributions and foundation building. I smiled. Thanked everyone. Walked out at 5:15 with a box of personal items and a clarity I'd been missing for years. My career wasn't ending. It was finally beginning. 3 weeks into my new role at Vantage Partners, my phone buzzed with an email from a former client. Hartwell Manufacturing. The account I'd saved 18 months earlier. The one worth $2.4 million annually. Elena, I hope this finds you well. We've been experiencing some challenges with Holden lately. Reports delayed. Calls unreturned. Not the service standard you established. They wanted to know if I could help. As a consultant maybe. I forwarded the email to Mark with a polite note, forwarding this to you as the current director. I'm sure you'll handle it well. He never responded. Not to me. Apparently not to them either. 2 weeks later, Hartwell sent another email. This time to my Vantage address. We've decided to transition our account. We'd like to discuss bringing our business to Vantage Partners. Specifically, we'd like to work with you again. I stared at that email for a long time. They hadn't followed me out of loyalty. They'd followed consistency. Quality. The relationship I'd built when I was still at Holden. The structure was collapsing without its foundation. Exactly like I knew it would. More clients reached out over the following months. Prescott Industries. Donovan Group. Others I'd worked with at Holden. Same pattern. Service had declined. Communication had slowed. The attention to detail they'd grown accustomed to had disappeared. 3 of them moved their contracts to Vantage. 2 others were in discussions. I didn't recruit them. Didn't badmouth Holden. Didn't have to. The work spoke for itself. Or rather, the absence of that work spoke volumes. Word travels fast in professional services. Especially when a mid-level company starts bleeding major accounts. It became clear through industry contacts that Holden was scrambling. Emergency client retention meetings. Damage control strategies. All the things I used to handle before they decided Mark's MBA was more valuable than my results. One former colleague sent me a message, "It's chaos here. Nobody knows how you kept all these plates spinning. Mark's drowning." I didn't respond. What was there to say? I tried to tell them what the job actually required. They'd chosen credentials over competence. Now they were learning the difference. At Vantage, I was building something different. A team that actually valued institutional knowledge. Leadership that asked for my input and implemented my recommendations. Projects with my name attached. The work was the same. The recognition was completely different. 6 months after I left Holden, I got a call from a former colleague who still worked there. "Elena, I thought you should know. Mark's gone. They let him go last week." She explained the details. Multiple client losses. Failed recovery attempts. A particularly bad quarter that had the board asking questions. My old director had resigned for personal reasons a month earlier. 2 other senior managers had been reassigned. Half the accounts I'd once managed had migrated to competitors. Several were now mine at Vantage. The department I'd held together for 18 months had fallen apart in 6. I felt something I didn't expect. Not satisfaction exactly. Just a quiet confirmation that I'd been right all along. The role hadn't been about fresh perspective or strategic thinking. It had been about doing the work. Understanding the details. Building real relationships. Things you can't fake with an MBA. "They're asking about you," my former colleague said. "Wondering if you'd consider coming back." I almost laughed. "I'm happy where I am." I figured. "But HR is supposed to call you officially. Consulting opportunity or something." The call came 3 days later. Holden's HR director was professional. Polite. Slightly desperate. "Elena, we're reaching out to see if you'd be open to a consulting arrangement. Just a few months to help stabilize some client relationships and document processes." Help stabilize. Document processes. Translation: fix what we broke when we didn't value you. We'd compensate you at premium consulting rates, of course. And we'd be flexible with your schedule. Premium rates. For the same work they'd refused to properly compensate me for when I was their employee. I let the silence sit for a moment. Considered my response carefully. "I appreciate you thinking of me, but I'm not available for consulting work right now. My responsibilities at Vantage require my full attention. We understand you're busy, but perhaps we could discuss terms that would make it worth your time." "It's not about terms," I said. "I have no interest in rebuilding what could have been maintained with proper recognition 18 months ago." More silence. She hadn't expected that answer. "I understand. If you change your mind." "I won't. But I appreciate the call." I hung up feeling lighter than I had in months. They'd finally seen my value. Just 2 years too late. 2 months later, Vantage Partners was invited to co-host an industry summit on client retention and relationship management. The location, Holden and Company's downtown conference center. They were trying to rebuild their reputation by hosting industry events. My boss asked if I'd be comfortable representing Vantage as a speaker. Panel discussion on innovative retention strategies. "Absolutely," I said. The day of the summit, I walked into that conference center wearing my Vantage Partners credentials. Director of Client Services. Speaker badge. The panel was in the main auditorium. 300 people. I recognized faces scattered throughout. Former colleagues. Former clients. Competitors. When I stepped onto the stage and sat at the panel table, I saw my old boss in the 3rd row. He looked away quickly. Mark wasn't there. But others from my old department were. They stared at their programs like they'd suddenly become fascinating. The moderator introduced me. Elena Brooks, Director of Client Services at Vantage Partners. "Elena, you've built a reputation in this industry for innovative approaches to client retention. Can you share some of your strategies?" I spoke for 12 minutes. About relationship building. About understanding that clients don't leave companies, they leave experiences. About the difference between managing accounts and actually caring about outcomes. Everything I'd tried to explain at Holden. Everything they'd ignored until Mark said it with an MBA behind his name. The audience was silent. Engaged. When I finished, the applause started immediately. This time, no one needed an MBA to recognize leadership. This time, it was for me. My work. My name. My ideas presented in my own voice. I didn't look at my former colleagues. Didn't need to. My presence said everything that needed saying. After the panel, several people approached me. Potential clients. Industry contacts. A recruiter who wanted to discuss executive positions. One person stood back waiting. When the crowd cleared, she stepped forward. Former colleague from Holden. Someone I'd mentored years ago. "Elena. That was incredible. You always had these insights, but seeing you present them now. She paused. You made it. You really made it. I smiled. Not the polite smile I'd perfected at Holden. A real one. No, I said. I was always here. You all just refused to see it. She nodded slowly. Understanding. We talked for a few minutes. She mentioned Holden was still struggling. Still searching for someone who could do what I'd done. Still not understanding that you can't replace institutional knowledge with credentials. When she left, I stood in that conference center lobby for a moment. Same building where I'd sat through countless meetings being overlooked. Same hallways where I'd walked feeling invisible despite doing visible work. But everything was different now. Not because I'd changed. Because I'd finally found people who could see what was already there. They'd quietly blocked my promotion. Dismissed my worth. Chosen packaging over performance. The market didn't. The market saw results. Valued competence. Recognized leadership regardless of where the degree came from. And once the market spoke, I never had to explain myself again. I walked out of that building for the last time. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. Just with the calm certainty that comes from knowing your worth, and never again settling for people who can't see it. The applause was still ringing in my ears. This time, it was mine. They quietly blocked my promotion. The market didn't. And once the market speaks, silence becomes permanent.